Thank you guys very much for joining us on a Friday afternoon. I was commenting earlier that for a short week, it's been a doozy of a week. So thank you for taking a time out of your very likely busy and hectic day to join us. Welcome to our Inspire Me event, Lifting Up Toledo. This is part one of what will be a two-part Inspire Me series. And to put some context behind what the words Inspire Me mean, each of our 5 city centers in the Ohio-Kentucky chapter is given the flexibility to really define what is inspiring to them. And we've had folks do things like building tours or focus on wellness and maybe do some outdoor yoga. But today we thought we'd focus on the wonderful work and mission of the Toledo Design Collective. I think it's very logical and easy to define the work that they're doing as very inspiring. So we are looking to understand what their mission and their work is today in part one. And then in part two, we would be meeting, oh my gosh, in person in September. Wait for that date to come. You can imagine the complexities of getting several event calendars to overlap for availability, but we look forward to meeting in person in early September to be immersed in one of the neighborhoods that Toledo Design Collective has worked with and is continuing to work with to better understand the work and the mission that they are on. So details to come on that for sure. Just a couple of additional housekeeping items. We know that this is being recorded. Thank you to our tech guru, Emma, for doing so. I wanted to make sure that we make you aware of an upcoming IIDA program, Zero Landfill. Is coming in July. So what felt like was so far away is very close in July. That'll be held at American Interiors. Thank you to American Interiors for hosting us for our Zero Landfill program. For those of you that may not be familiar or need a reminder, Zero Landfill's mission is just what the name explains. We want to keep things out of the landfill, specifically outdated design library materials. So if you were needing to purge your library, now would be the time to do so. We'll promote days and times for you to drop those materials off. And then we have separate days and times for really the general public to come and take those materials and with the hope of reusing or upcycling them. So definitely share that with your fellow friends, crafters, teachers, hoarders, whatever. If they want the stuff, it's free and it's up for grabs. So look for more to come on that. And then I would be remiss if I did not mention the Get Connected event, which is an IIDA membership focused event that is slated for Wednesday, the 23rd of this month, in person. Again, can you even believe it? At the Urban Pine Winery in Maumee. So if you're able to join us, we'd love for you to do so. We can talk a little bit more about what IIDA Toledo and the Ohio-Kentucky chapter in general is up to at that time. And last but certainly not least, we certainly want to make sure that we're thanking our benefactors for the IIDA Ohio-Kentucky chapter. These are vendor partners that have dedicated dollars to us for the entire calendar year. And we are more appreciative than ever, especially with the impacts of COVID and having these partners on board. We would certainly not be able to do any of our programming, have a Zoom account, do any of the things without them. So a big thank you to each one of those manufacturers. And I think with that, Emma's going to do a little tech shifting here. We are going to get started and move into our programming. So I've already kind of explained what the Inspire Me series framework is, and we're really excited to focus today on the Toledo Design Collective. So the Toledo Design Collective, if you are not aware, is inspiring transformative growth through urban planning and thoughtful design. They are a nonprofit organization, and with their full-time staff supported by their very active and gracious volunteer board, are dedicated to improving the function and aesthetic of Toledo as a region. They strive to provide long-term impact by promoting urban planning and design and impacts that quality of life, making Toledo a more desirable place to live, work, and to also play. So joining us from the Toledo Design Collective today is, looking for her name to make sure she's on here, but there she is, Linda Beal, TDC Advancements Committee Chair, Elizabeth Ellis, TDC Studio Chair, and Mr. Paul Hollenbeck, TDC Chair. So with that, we're gonna switch the powers that be over to Elizabeth, who's going to run the presentation. and they're going to walk us through some of their work and their mission as a team.
All right, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Let me pull up my PowerPoint here.
And while she's doing that, I'll interject and say that the typical Zoom caveat, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them into the chat box so that you don't forget, but we'll also be, of course, having some Q&A at the end. So thank you.
Thanks, Katie, again. So thanks again. I am Elizabeth Ellis. I am the studio director for the Toledo Design Collective, and I'm just going to run through why we're here today. So first, I wanted to point out that the Toledo Design Collective is an organization that operates not as a standalone, but we actually are a part of a larger organizational mission with other community design centers throughout the United States. So within the US, there's over 60 design centers, and within Ohio, there are 3 other, specifically within Ohio, there are 3 other design centers. And we really have a great relationship with Cleveland and Columbus. And I think at some point we were in talks before COVID about launching a collective website. It kind of got put on hold because of COVID, but we're looking to collaborate with them soon again. And I want to point out too that I'm actually semi a product of the Cleveland Design Center. I went to Kent State for grad school, and as a part of that, I was in Cleveland, and Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative operates out of the Kent State offices. So just wanted to bring that up. But out of all of these design centers, how we operate is really out of this core mission and the core commitment to diversity and really listening to the different voices in the community. So who the Toledo Design Collective is, we actually, you may have known as the Toledo Design Center. In 2018, we went through a strategic planning effort, which really resulted in a rebranding with a new name, website, and really clear language on the services we provide throughout Toledo. So we were founded in 2001 by Dick Myers and Robert Seifang with this core belief that strategic and thoughtful urban planning and design really has the power and the ability to reshape individuals' lives, the neighborhoods, and then of course the greater city of Toledo. So how do we do that? We engage the communities and the neighborhoods we serve, and we are engaging constantly public and private stakeholders throughout Toledo. We connect all of these organizations and stakeholders to the design profession and the collective knowledge that we have. And lastly, we create a vision with communities and neighborhoods to really form the short and long-term visions and plans for how to get them to the next steps. So this slide kind of shows all of the different players that are within our board and our staff. So like Katie mentioned, we are a nonprofit organization. We have myself and one other full-time staff member, Molly Burns, who's our project manager. And then we also are supplemented with college co-ops and interns that we get throughout the year with different semesters. And then of course we have almost 40 volunteer members that have this collective knowledge in architecture and planning, urban design, finance, urban development, education, pretty much anything within the realm that planning provides. We have kind of a board member that has that expertise. So they really also help to supplement the work that we do and supplement the connections that we can make with our communities. So with education and advocacy, we really rely on our community partners. We realize that they are the experts in their own community, and so we fully want to engage them through any decision-making process. We are also at our core an advocate for excellence in design and the effect it really has throughout day-to-day life as a neighborhood resident, or really just anyone who's visiting Toledo. Again, mentorship and education is really central to the Design Collective's founding. We have opportunities for college interns and co-op students with interest in planning and design. And now more than ever, as we begin to shift even more so as an organization, it's important for us to amplify the neighborhood voices we serve. And this means that we're working towards mentoring our communities and teaching the next generations of designers, much of whom should really come from within the communities that we work in. So by creating and forming this vision with community members and neighborhood residents, we're actually helping to reshape and prioritize quality of life through design solutions. So things that affect quality of life and have an impact on day-to-day living are things like sustainability or development that provides give back to the neighborhoods that they're in, or even just finding solutions with a lot of the vacant land that exists within Toledo. So this map illustrates Toledo and the neighborhoods that we have worked with. So you'll see a lot of the neighborhoods are highlighted within this zone 1, and actually the orange outline is historically what the city of Toledo looked like 100 years ago. So you'll see that really much of the disinvestment that's happened in Toledo is really within this zone 1 in this central area of Toledo. So to give some context, these are areas that to some degree really are still experiencing the effects of redlining and in the 30s, and then even urban renewal in the 60s. And these are just some of the causes and effects of systemic racism and our injustices within our city. The Design Collective mainly works with neighborhood organizations to help them form neighborhood master plans to address some of these issues and help to stop the decline of our neighborhoods. So this is another map that kind of illustrates the effects of those systemic injustices that have happened throughout the city, and you'll see all of the pink is the vacant land within Toledo, and you can see that it also includes parkland, but it still paints the picture of how much vacant land within even this zone 1 is compared to the rest of the city. And we really view this land as opportunity, and in some cases, in some ways, it's a blank canvas, and not that it's a blank canvas with not nuanced things that had happened in the past, but it's a blank canvas and the possibilities are endless of what you can do with that land, what neighborhoods can do with not even just vacant land, but also vacant buildings that we see pop up within our city as well. Like, what do you do to kind of restore those neighborhoods, because they have an effect on the neighborhoods and the residents. So then we get into planning. So we know that downtown Toledo is recently, it's really starting to come back. I think we see this a lot, but when we first started 20 years ago, downtown Toledo really looked a lot different than it does today. And in 2011, the TDC completed a downtown Toledo plan, which include all of these downtown neighborhoods that you see on the screen. So that includes the core business district. It also includes warehouse district, uptown, Vistula, and middle grounds. And we believe that the continued conversation for the importance of planning within Toledo really helped lead to the 2017 Downtown Toledo Master Plan that Connect Toledo. The Downtown Toledo Development Corporation has really helped shepherd and helped bring in new development into downtown. So planning is extremely important as we move forward in what we want to see for the city's future. So these are some of the planning efforts that we've done within Toledo, and some of the things that have resulted from those planning efforts. So in Warehouse District, one of the pieces that we included were these parking lot improvement studies. And just by adding a fence and an edge around a parking lot, it drastically changes your visual of what downtown looks like when you come into it, instead of just seeing an empty parking lot with no fence or not a lot of landscape. Now people will see more of this change and more of a place that does feel comfortable to walk around in. So this is actually within an overlay, I believe, within downtown. So anytime a business wants to improve their property, they actually are required to do some of these things. So that's a really great change for our downtown. In uptown, we see things like the eBide market that was brought in by ProMedica. We also are now seeing there's going to be some housing across from the eBide market, as well as the Uptown Green area. Then the Old South End, we've seen things like Danny Thomas Park. We've also seen the creation of Broadway Corridor Coalition, which is an organization that did not exist before the plan. It kind of coalesced, it was multiple organizations within the Old South End that kind of coalesced around the plan, and because of that, they were able to form a neighborhood organization. And then in Junction, we see things like the land bank taking over St. Anthony's Church and having a feasibility study for what the reuse of that church could be. We also see community gardens start to pop up. So all of these things are kind of a result of the planning efforts that we've done with our neighborhoods. So what is a neighborhood master plan then? So we've tried to kind of coalesce around all of these different ideas and really streamline more of a definition around it. But essentially, a neighborhood plan is really a long-term vision that helps describe this dynamic conceptual framework to guide and inform a community's redevelopment. The most important piece of this is that it is significantly shaped, managed, and implemented by the neighborhood residents and businesses within the neighborhood. Again, they are the experts of what they want. They are the experts of how their neighborhood currently operates and how they would like it to operate. So we always make them the continuous voice of the planning effort. And so the pieces of it, it includes things like community engagement, analysis, recommendations, and proposals. And then all of these components are really focused on providing and enhancing the quality of life for both those existing and future residents and stakeholders. And then this image was actually pulled from the Neighborhood Design Center in Baltimore, but we really like this image because it really shows and depicts really like who is coming to the table and how we want our communities to be the drivers of implementation. So you'll see, and actually too, Baltimore is really analogous to how the TDC operates. So we have both our staff, but then we also have our volunteer design professionals or our board coming to the table, as well as, of course, residents, community organizations, private and public stakeholders. And really, it's all about the more inclusive the process is, the stronger the buy-in and the longer lasting the project. Because at the end of the day, we realize that, a plan is a plan and is just a plan unless somebody is actually able to take it and kind of run with it and do something with it. So these are some of the elements of a neighborhood plan. So we have data gathering, neighborhood engagement, framework, action plan, and then refinement and approval. So I'll kind of quickly go through those. So data gathering, this includes, this really helps set up the plan itself. So it's kind of like the backbone of the plan in a lot of ways. It sets up all of the existing factors within a neighborhood. So it includes things like census, it includes things like the urban tree canopy or a proximity to job centers. Also, we will identify neighborhood anchors or assets with communities. So all of these pieces too, I want to mention, are really powerful as individual elements, but when you begin to layer them up, it really paints a picture of where there are gaps in neighborhoods. And I will say too, most of the neighborhoods we work in, there's a gap in typically resources or funding or even just access to things. All of the neighborhoods we work in are food deserts, as in they don't have access to healthy and affordable food options. And that becomes an issue, especially if you layer in things like bus transportation. We know that a lot of our neighborhood residents rely on public transportation. And so when bus routes or bus lines are not as active, it just creates another barrier to things like food or healthcare or other things that the neighborhood needs. And then we go to neighborhood engagement, and this is probably the heartbeat to the plan. If the data gathering is kind of like the backbone, I would say that this is the heartbeat. It's probably the most fulfilling part of the job too, actually getting out and talking to neighborhood residents and stakeholders. And you might think, well, what is, you can go to all of these meetings or you could go door to door, but what does that really do? But it's really about building trust within the neighborhood and building leaders and building that capacity within. But at the end of the day too, it's really interesting. I should also say too, as I'm realizing, our neighborhood plans are typically, they take about a year, and part of it is because it is about building that trust, and it's also about how the process works as well. But at the beginning of that year, you can start to see people beginning to trust us. And at the end of the year, you really see that trust turn into that larger capacity, and then it turns into empowerment that the neighborhood residents and stakeholders feel. And that's really, really fulfilling to see them kind of stand up for themselves and be able to, talk to the higher powers that be to really ask for, this is what we need because this is what we want to get out of it. So this is a really big part of the planning process. So there are a lot of different forms within neighborhood engagement. The biggest one is attending existing events. Anytime we can plug into, a block party or any kind of gathering that the neighborhood is having, it's usually the best way for us to get feedback because that's where they're going anyways. We'll also do canvassing, whether it's door-to-door surveying. You see, this is our intern, Liz Moore. She was with us last summer, and she went out and she was able to canvass the Garfield neighborhood. We'll also do design charrettes where we really put pen to paper with neighborhood residents and stakeholders and ask for real-time feedback on what we're drawing. Public meetings. There's also, because of COVID, we had to get a little creative this year, and we started doing these temporary mailboxes. So this is actually like a temporary drop box that people could fill out surveys and just stick it in the box. And then we actually collected over 200 responses, which was a lot more than we expected. So it was really fantastic. And then of course we do things like flyers or mailings out to our neighborhoods as well to make sure that everybody realizes what's going on. And then we have the framework layout. So framework really takes all of that data collection and then all of the neighborhood engagement and kind of like merges them together and really lays out conceptual ideas of what is possible based on what we were hearing the neighborhood really wants. So what that looks like then is typically a lot of conceptual renderings that you see kind of on your screen. And it's about, this is the point too where we start showing those images. And I think all of us around the table would agree that, as designers, like this is the stage that people like have their aha moments of, oh, like this is what I wanted to see, and like, oh, this is what is possible, and that's really powerful as well. And then finally we set up the action plan. So this takes the framework and actually lays it out into a timeline for potential implementation of the plan. So really it's about taking and setting up those short-term action items versus long-term implementation. So something that could be a short-term action item would be something like growing the capacity within the neighborhood, or doing placemaking, or things that Arts Commission does like creative board ups that really highlight what could be within a neighborhood. And then a longer term implementation might be, okay, how do we strategically think about building back businesses within the neighborhood? So an example of this would be a park. This is the LaGrange Park within Vistula, and currently it's a vacant land. It's a vacant lot. There's nothing really going on, but a short term, you might have little pop-ups that happen within the park. And then long term, you might actually start to see it actually become a park. So part of the short-term strategy too is that once you do these things, you actually will sometimes, you'll be able to apply for funding or grants to actually implement these longer term items as well. So it also helps to set the stage of, you know, what is possible and how other organizations can plug into the plan in the neighborhood as well. So then an even longer term strategy then, as you see the park here, the other piece is, you know, how do you think about how that park affects the surrounding context and how it can influence, strategically influence and inform development around the rest of the neighborhood. And then at the end of the day, so our plan is, it becomes a document, and our ultimate goal is for our plans to be approved as an amendment to the City of Toledo 2020 Comprehensive Plan. So this means it goes through Toledo Lucas County Plan Commission, and then it goes to Toledo City Council to get approved. And this image, this came from the Junction neighborhood when the Junction neighborhood master plan got approved. They were really so excited that we had to take a photo shoot with the council members within Toledo. So that was a really fun thing that happened after our plan. So, and then I kind of alluded to it earlier, but these are other projects that kind of have come out of some of our planning efforts. So What Blooms on Bloom is a community garden within the Junction community. And it was once a vacant lot, and they came together. There were a couple of volunteer days, but essentially a lot of this happened on Earth Day in 2018, I believe. And so the whole community kind of got together. There were, they planted fruit trees. There was also students and children painted rain barrels for rain barrel catchment. And then they also installed some raised beds, garden beds for the community to kind of use in the community garden setting. Another project that is coming up is, and that has been ongoing since the plan, is a 6-block target area. So this is, again, within the Junction neighborhood. And this, because of that master plan, it really highlighted where there is housing opportunity within the neighborhood. And so because of that, there were a lot of organizations that kind of really got interested in what was happening, and it brought organizations like the Land Bank or the Department of Neighborhoods from the City of Toledo. It also brought Habitat for Humanity to the table, NODA, ABLE, LMH, and all committed to how do we make this 6-block target area, how could it be kind of a pilot project of what could happen within the 6 blocks, and then how do we take this 6 blocks and also replicate it throughout the community once the pilot project is kind of successful and there is good development around it. This was something else that came out of the Junction project. This was a partnership with the Arts Commission. They were really interested in Arts Commission was really interested in what if we take those anchor maps that we created with the community and those assets maps, and instead of just having it a map on paper, that we actually create a wayfinding device within the neighborhood. So we talked to students about, where they feel safe and where they like to play, what they like to do, but then they also were able to paint on this mural what they like to do within the neighborhood, and it's actually within the neighborhood, posted as you see here. And then the final thing I wanted to really talk about is a current project that we're doing right now, and how the engagement specifically within this project has changed a lot, mainly because this project really started last July when we were in the thick of COVID, and we'll be finished with it in August. So this is the Garfield Community Plan. For those who don't know, Garfield is a neighborhood on the east side of Toledo. It is where the main and Star Business District is. It also sits right along the river. It's where the new Glass City Metro Park is. All of these things are connected to the Garfield neighborhood. So this plan in particular, we have a lot of really fantastic partner organizations. Of course, East Toledo Family Center and One Voice for East Toledo are our neighborhood partners throughout the project as well. And so right now where we are, we're really between the framework and the action plan, and engagement is still going on. We actually have some planned events in person coming up in the next couple of months. But this is what we've been able to accomplish so far. So you'll see we helped flyer some of the other events that we were able to have within the neighborhood. Also, again, canvassing. This was set up at the new Metro Parks Pavilion at Glass City Metro Park. And this happened in February, but Metro Parks really wanted to kick off something, and something that they wanted to make sure that residents felt like this park was theirs. And so they made this sledding event, and we were able to set up some tables and really ask residents what they wanted to see within their neighborhood and how to better connect them to it. We've also set up this participation toolkit, which is essentially just like a brochure, a trifold brochure that really outlines, how you can get connected to the neighborhood planning effort, whether you have an hour or more to talk to us, or whether your interaction just wants to be, 30 seconds or less. So kind of setting up the stage of how people want to interact with the planning process. And then something also that we've set up specifically for Garfield is a website, so that the plan kind of always has this, it's always this livable document. It has resources within the website that people can kind of go into and see. And then we've also created social media for people to follow along the planning process. And then finally, I just want to end with, again, that TDC's main mission is always to center our neighborhood partners. And so without them, we wouldn't really be where we are today. And they are extremely fun to work with. And we've seen a lot of growth within Toledo as well through these partnerships. And I do want to point out as well that most of these organizations are fully volunteer organizations, as in they're taking their own time to really run and help shape what their neighborhood wants to be. Some of them have staff, but it's very limited staff. So it's really incredible what they've been able to do. So with that, I'll close out and leave room for questions, and also allow Paul and Linda to also input to that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's a lot to digest, and all truly very, very good, and not to be overly cheesy, but truly inspiring work that you guys are getting into. I have not been as familiar with the Toledo Design Collective nor the Cleveland entity. So I just felt like that was a very insightful view of even logistically how you guys function. So thank you. But truly, yes, we'd love to hear from Paul and from Linda as well. Maybe what pulled at you guys to get involved with the TDC, or what does your day-to-day involvement look like? I suspect that, again, just how you logistically function as a group might be new to many of us. So we'd love to understand just a little about what your involvement looks like, and anything else you want to share.
I'll let Linda go first.
Oh.
I would say one thing, you know, being the only man on this phone call is kind of very weird, but there were only two people that were actually active during that whole presentation, and it was Rebecca and Carolyn, who are the two people that I worked with for many, many years at the Collaborative. I just thought it was wonderful to be able to watch you again. So that's great.
I would have been happy for you to watch me had my bandwidth been holding up. And, so I do have a tendency to turn off the video when I can see unusual things start to happen on Zoom. So my work in terms of urbanism has been, you know, many, many years, but my activity with the design collective did not really begin until 2016. And it was a way to become more engaged, but to also provide for some additional participation by our students. At the time, I was teaching at the university, at the College of Engineering, and I really thought that in terms of long-term urban sustainability, that the engineers, particularly at the civil and the environmental engineers, had a number of really good input and rationale in terms of long-term urban sustainability. And so that was one of the reasons. The other one is that it, like many other people, it just came at a good time in my career. And now that I'm sort of transitioning from sort of being on the executive committee and kind of the advising committee to a more day-to-day role, which we could call management, but we don't really mean to call it management because we don't do a lot of that. But having a more active role. So my days tend to involve, you know, mentoring students, mentoring staff, making sure that that the educational aspects of the design center are kind of taken care of. Does that make sense? For an unprepared question, that was about it.
You feel that very well. No, that's helpful, just to understand the pieces of the puzzle on your guys' side. Paul, what about you? What is your day-to-day or month-to-month or any of that look like? Explain to us a bit more your role in the group, please.
Oh, as Rebecca said, I'm retired, so day-to-day is, you know, who knows. But I guess I became aware of the Toledo Design Collective probably 15 years ago, and I was inspired by two people that I regarded as mentors, Dick Myers and Bob Seafang. And they, when their careers ended up, you know, when they became towards the end of their professional career, as a typical professional career, they decided that they had a lot to give back, and they wanted to figure out a way to do that. So they formed the organization 20 years ago, and for 20 years it operated almost 20 years. It operated as a 100% volunteer organization, and so we're going through a major. And so 15 years ago, almost, I wanted to follow in their footsteps, and so I left the Collaborative after working with people like Carolyn and Rebecca, and joined and dedicated my time to the Toledo Design Collective as a volunteer. I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago we realized that the Design Collective as a 100% volunteer organization was not sustainable anymore, that we needed to have some modest amount of paid staff. And we found Elizabeth, or she found us, and it was transformative. She has taken our organization to a whole new level, and we have, our credibility and our worth and our value to the community is much more significant and impactful. And our goal is to continue to add a couple more staff, quite frankly. But we're in this really tricky transition period where we're going from 100% volunteer with no money to trying to raise money and to have a staff and to be regarded as a community leader, and showing that good planning and design can have a positive impact. So it's been quite a journey, but I think I'm really optimistic about the future. I would say also that there are design centers that we admire. The Cleveland or the Columbia is one, and they get involved in interiors. They get involved in conceptualizing and to help the same neighborhoods that we help, but they dig a little deeper. They get inside the walls and they try to work in the same ways that we work to try to find out what's possible and to inspire and to create change and work for others. So it's not something that IIDA couldn't or shouldn't consider in the future. So.
Well, and that transitions to both some questions and some comments I had too. I mean, first of all, welcome to a typical IIDA event, Paul, that you would be the only gentleman. That's how we roll. Sorry.
Amy and I had 4 daughters, so I'm okay with it. So.
You're well versed. Okay. But yeah, I would say, we as, those who I will say myself had practiced in commercial interior design, and those of us that are still practicing, we really define ourselves as designers that focus on the health, safety, and wellness of our interior occupants. And those very broad strokes are very much aligning with everything that you guys are speaking about. So I think there's definitely an opportunity for crossover, for collaboration, for all of that. And I mean, in a perfect world, we would all be leaving not just this session, but our in-person session in September, raising our hand and saying, how can we help and contribute some of our time and our talent? So I'm optimistic that that would happen, because I do think there's a lot of opportunity for some synergies there.
Yeah, I mean, Elizabeth's presentation, she really emphasized our neighborhood master planning, but quite frankly, as part of our strategic planning, we really feel we need to not throw that away, because it's been really important to our evolution and our impact. But we see in the future, our focus will be much more in placemaking and in more project specific, which again could have opportunities for people that are on this call. And also in the area of education and mentorship, because we're starting to look at not only trying to be mentors to future professionals, but also to really make a difference. You want to maybe try to get into the K through 12 area and try to help kids understand their environment better and the impact it has on their daily lives. So.
Absolutely. A question in the chat panel, and also one that I had scribbled down too, kind of logistically, just curious about how you guys interact with some of your other design collectives in other cities. Do you often chat or touch base, or what does that interaction look like?
I think
He's
so.
deflecting.
It depends. I will say we are definitely closer with our Ohio design centers. A couple of years ago, we actually went to Columbus, and we all kind of like coalesced around the table and talked about different ideas that we have and how we could collaborate. And we'll check in every once in a while. There is also, I will mention, there's the Association for Community Design, which is a membership where these other design centers, or actually firms, can also be a part of that organization, kind of coalesce around community design. And their big push is to always have a yearly conference where they'll do like a long weekend somewhere in one of the cities that the organizations are. So
that makes sense.
I saw in the chat box there was a question about some people that we associate with, and Habitat for Humanity was asked about. I guess Rebecca asked about that. Elizabeth, we're working with them right now, right?
Mhm. Yeah, they're a part of the Junction 6 blocks, and they actually brought to the table, and through our pushing, we asked them to, they wanted to do a net zero housing competition, which some of you may have heard about through AIA Toledo, and we were able to make that connection between Habitat and AIA Toledo a little bit stronger. I'm not sure where that stands currently, but that's to say we are in conversations with Habitat, and they're actually, Habitat has been a really good partner with the Junction Coalition and the Junction neighborhood. So that's really fantastic.
And it is one of the advantages of the board being as large as it is, so that we have a number of opportunities for that. And in fact, Erin Curley is on this call. I won't call her out, but she's one of the people who is really involved with Habitat, and has been for years, and so brings that experience to the table with our projects.
And I know at least one of our members, Jen Roscoe with SSOE, is involved in that net zero competition as well. So again, some natural crossovers and synergies that are happening that we need to be more invested in and really start to kind of watch to see how we can continue to grow from that. Absolutely. I would be curious to know too, and Elizabeth, what made me think of it was specifically when you mentioned like food deserts. Does your master planning efforts or your data gathering, does that help drive business conversation about we are lacking a grocery store, or we are lacking a gas station, or how does that process work from a business standpoint?
I think it certainly sets
just
the
a small
stage.
question, you know, no big deal, but
I think it certainly sets the stage. I think we're getting to a point, because we've worked in so many different neighborhoods that all have the same needs. I think they're starting to take notice, like the city as a whole and other development corporations as a whole. And so hopefully it continues that conversation, right? Like if nothing else, it like highlights that there's still the need and the want for these accessible things.
Yeah, and probably the solution isn't a neighborhood at a time, but it's going to have to be a collective approach to solving the issue, probably. As Elizabeth says, it's prevalent in that whole area that we talked about, basically. So.
And it's not just the one thing too. It's how those things kind of layer up on top of each other, whether it's bike access or bus access. And so it's the whole system.
No, that makes sense. Is there, and maybe not specific to like the design collective model, but is there a sister city or a model city that Toledo looks at that you're aware of that says like, gosh, they've had a lot of the same struggles, or the data is very similar of where we started, but this is kind of the model of who maybe we're going after, just out of curiosity?
I think it depends on who you talk to.
Sure.
Who the sister city is. A lot of times I think we look to Detroit because we're, in a lot of ways, Toledo is kind of always a little bit behind what happens in Detroit. But I think, this is my own personal opinion, I think Toledo and Dayton are really similar, in that we have a very similar size and we're dealing with very similar problems. And Dayton actually has really good community development corporations that are helping the city. Toledo doesn't have any community development corporations, and that's really, it's hindering us from succeeding in the future. I don't know if Paul or Linda, if you have other ideas of what sister cities are.
So maybe not a sister city, but one of the things that COVID brought to the table in a positive way. Now, bear in mind, I taught freshmen for 20 years, so I always try to bring a positive spin to the conversation. One of the things was it allowed us to have a greater relationship with, I'll call them aspirational design centers, the ones that maybe we we aren't that similar to, but we would like to be, and particularly their educational programs. Nashville, the Civic Design Center there, they just changed their name. So they have done a number of really magnificent outreach courses and have been very engaged. So that was actually very helpful to be a part of. And so that didn't depend upon, you know, driving to Dayton or driving to Columbus or to Buffalo or to Baltimore. It was independent of that, and it was extremely useful.
Point. As much as we all hate the Zoom and are over it, it really did point out that we can logically be collaborating and we don't have to get in a car to do it, you know. It's gotten a little less probably sexy as things have drug on, but it's still just a really valuable lesson for all of us, and I'm sure in many ways. A question in the chat panel, very good question, Bree. What would you guys say, again, not a loaded question at all, but what would you say TDC's biggest struggle? Is it finding involvement or volunteers? Is it more of a funding? Is it all of the above? What do you guys see as your biggest pain points currently?
So I'll plunge in on this one as well, and my apologies to Paul, but I would say we have a number of challenges, but by far the biggest one is getting a seat at the table. So being recognized and having significant impact and input into the governmental planning process. Staffing, we have been remarkably fortunate, and hopefully that quality continues in perpetuity. Funding is always going to be a challenge. Consistent funding that we don't have to fight for every year has always been a challenge. And of course, now there's more, certainly under COVID, and you know, even moving past that, there have been significantly more asks for a greater diminishing pool of funds. So
I will say, without going too far into this, I think this is definitely a group that can understand the challenge of getting a seat at the table and having that seat respected at the table. That is a constant struggle that anyone in an interior design function is fighting for, just to be totally frank. So we can definitely empathize with that and understand that is really probably 3/4 of the battle, right? Is to be there, to be respected, and to be viewed as a valuable part of that conversation. We can definitely understand that. Absolutely. This has been amazing and fantastic. It's truly kind of unlocked my brain and just I'm a curious gal by nature, so it just made me think a lot. But we are coming up a little bit on time. We've got a few more moments. If anyone has any questions, comments, anything, feel free to unmute yourself and add to the live conversation.
Could I add one quick
Please.
thing? I mean, if any, you know, certainly when it comes to volunteers, we are always looking for input, volunteers, et cetera. And if anyone is interested, please reach out. Perfectly, you know, we would love to have a conversation. We would love to have you be engaged.
We appreciate that very, very much. I again, like I said at the beginning, I suspect that this part one, and then definitely a part two in person where we're being immersed in maybe that Junction neighborhood, will start to really make the light bulb come on to see how we can contribute our time and our talents to your guys' mission. Absolutely. So if we know there's no other questions, we can give you 4 minutes of your day back during your lunch hour. 4 minutes is 4 minutes on a Friday, so we'll take it. But thank you to Toledo Design Collective again, Elizabeth, Paul, Linda. Thank you guys so very much for carving out the time and sharing so much of your passion and your story with us. Again, I just think this really got us all thinking and looking at things a little bit differently, and definitely fit the definition of being inspiring. So again, a huge thank you. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
and again,
thank you
to everyone.
Thank you all.
This has been a very nice highlight on a Friday. So we appreciate seeing faces and hearing voices, and we cannot wait to see people in person. So again, remember, we've got our member event coming up in a couple of weeks with IIDA Toledo. We'd love to have everybody there, as well as Zero Landfill in July. So we hope to see smiling faces then also. But that's it. Thank you guys very much. Have a wonderful weekend. It's gonna be a hot
Great to see you. all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have a good one.
Thank you.